June 1941, Lwów. Nazi Germany launches its massive invasion against the Soviet Union. Germans are moving with devastating speed, cities fall within days, and behind the advancing troops follow the Einsatzgruppen. Mobile killing units whose task is not only to secure territory but to annihilate entire groups of people considered enemies of the Third Reich. In the borderlands of eastern Poland and western Ukraine, territories seized by the Soviets in 1939, the German occupation instantly transforms the landscape into another round of terror. Local communities, already exhausted by nearly 2 years of Soviet repression, now face a new wave of violence. As German forces move deeper into Soviet territory, the Nazi leadership views the region not merely as a military front but as a laboratory for racial warfare. Cities such as Lwów, with their universities, libraries, and strong intellectual traditions, are perceived as breeding grounds for future resistance. Thus, even before front lines stabilize, the SS and Gestapo, the German secret police, begin identifying targets for elimination. Among those marked are professors of Lwów, scholars, doctors, mathematicians, writers, men who embody the intellectual heritage of pre-war Poland and whom the occupiers see as obstacles to their long-term domination. By early July 1941, only days after the German capture of the city, the machinery of extermination is already in motion. Arrests begin at night and at the end 27. University professors and lecturers are murdered with their loved ones. However, these atrocities will not remain unpunished, and the perpetrators will pay for their crimes with their own lives. Lwów, today's Ukrainian Lviv, a jewel of pre-war Poland, had once been a city of learning, books, music and conversation. Before 1939, its population of more than 300,000 included scholars, artists, scientists, and writers. It had 5 universities and academies, among them the Jan Kazimierz University and the Lwów Polytechnic, institutions that had produced some of Poland's brightest minds. Professors of mathematics, medicine, law, and philosophy lectured in grand halls filled with young students. People spoke of the Lwów School of Mathematics with pride. And names like Stefan Banach, Hugo Steenhaus, and Antoni Lomnicki were known across Europe. But when the Second World War started on September 1, 1939, the city's fate changed forever. After the Soviet invasion of September 1939, Lwów was taken by Soviets and its universities were nationalized and renamed. Polish professors were forced to abolish Polish and to teach in Russian, some were dismissed, others arrested. Yet many remained, continuing their work quietly, believing that survival, both personal and cultural, was still possible and necessary for their students. When the Germans entered Lwów on June 30, 1941, people from the city greeted German soldiers with cautious relief, thinking perhaps the terror of the NKVD, the Soviet Secret Service, was over and the suppression would come to an end. What came instead was the methodical brutality of the Nazi occupation, because the German command viewed Poland not as a nation to govern but as a land to be conquered and abused. In German eyes, the Polish educated elite, professors, clergy, lawyers, doctors, were the roots from which resistance could grow during the war but also in the future, and it was necessary to kill them. In their view, to kill the intellectuals was a way how to kill the nation. The massacre of the professors of Lwów was not an act of battlefield rage but a calculated decision, part of the broader Nazi plan to annihilate Polish leadership. In the first days after the German takeover, a list of future victims began to circulate. It had been compiled, it seems, by Ukrainian nationalists and informers, some of them former students of the university, and handed to Gestapo, the German secret police. On it were the names of dozens of professors, men of science, literature, and medicine, who were all prominent Poles. The order to act against Lwów Professors came from SS officer Karl Eberhard Schöngarth, a jurist by training and a devoted Nazi. On the night of July 3, 1941, German cars moved through the darkened streets of Lwów. Doors were pounded upon and frightened families were dragged from their homes. Officers, some in Gestapo uniforms and others in those of the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces, entered apartments with prepared lists in hand. Professors and their families were taken away. Among them Antoni Siezinski, a pioneer of modern dentistry, Władimir Stozek, a mathematician and dean of the Polytechnic, Tadeusz Ostrowski, a surgeon and medical scholar and the writer, and translator Tadeusz Boyzelenski, one of the leading figures of Polish interwar literature. The arrested were brought to the Bursa Abrahamowiczów, a student dormitory, transformed into a temporary holding site by the Gestapo. Inside, they were beaten, interrogated, and humiliated. Witnesses later described screams that echoed through the corridors throughout the night. The next morning, trucks arrived, but before that some prisoners were taken to the courtyard of the former dormitory and shot there. Others were driven to the Wulka hills outside the city, today part of the city of Lviv. It was early morning when the executions began and the professors were lined up in small groups, facing open pits. They were shot, some by rifle, some by pistol. Those not immediately killed were finished off with bayonets or blows from hammers and rifle butts. Along with the 25 professors, approximately 25 other people, their wives, sons, and servants, were murdered as well. The final two victims, Professors Henryk Korowicz and Stanislaw Ruziewicz, were executed on July 12, 1941, bringing the total number of professors killed to 27. When the massacre ended, dozens of the city's most brilliant minds lay dead. Their bodies were buried hastily. But later, after the defeat at Stalingrad in 1943, the Nazis decided to conceal their crimes. To this end, they formed a special Sonderkommando 1005 which dug up mass graves and burned the bodies of the murdered. What happened to the ashes of murdered professors and their loved ones is unknown to this day. The killings were meant as a warning and a symbol. Intellectual authority would not be tolerated under Nazi rule. The universities of Lwów, like most of the educational institutions on the former Polish territory, were emptied. Their classrooms silent. Many remaining Polish academics fled or went into hiding. Behind the massacre stood Schöngarth and his subordinates, men whose names would later surface again in the grim history of the war, the Gestapo officers Walter Kutschmann, Felix Landau, Hans Krueger, and Kurt Stawisky. They all were involved and would continue in murdering of the civilian population in Eastern Europe. Some of them even recorded their crimes themselves, as they were writing diaries and mentioning mass murder as a normal part of their jobs. Thanks to this evidence, the murderers of the Lwów professors faced justice after the war. The most senior of the perpetrators in the killing of the professors, the SS Brigadeführer Karl Eberhard Schöngarth, who had personally ordered the killings, went on to participate in the machinery of genocide, including the Wannsee Conference in January 1942. After the war, he was captured by the British forces and brought before a military court. Ironically, he did not go before the court because of mass murder of thousands, but for the execution of a captured Allied airman. Despite this fact, his conviction led to his hanging in Hameln prison in Germany on May 16, 1946. His execution was justice for the thousands of lives he had taken during the war. Hans Krueger, one of the leading figures in the terror apparatus in the territory of Eastern Galicia and one of the murderers of the Lwów professors, was eventually brought to trial in West Germany in the 1960s. His central role in mass shootings and deportations in the Eastern Europe was laid bare during the proceedings, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. He spent the remainder of his life behind bars, dying in prison. Felix Landau, whose own diary chillingly recorded daily acts of murder, was also eventually forced to answer for his crimes. After years of living freely in Austria, his past caught up with him in the 1960s. He was tried in 1968, convicted, and sentenced to life imprisonment. He was freed after 18 years, and died 2 years later in 1988. Walter Kutschmann, another Gestapo officer, was arrested in Buenos Aires in Argentina in 1985, but died of a heart attack in a hospital the following year, before he could be extradited to West Germany. His wife was reported to the authorities for animal abuse, specifically for euthanizing homeless dogs in gas chambers. For years, the story of the murdered scholars remained buried. After the war, Lwów became part of the Soviet Union, Poles were expelled, and any memory of German crimes against them was suppressed. Only after the Soviet Union collapsed did the truth re-emerge. Polish and Ukrainian historians reconstructed the victims' final hours. And in 2011 a monument was unveiled in Lviv. It stands quietly in the city they once served, engraved with their names, preserving the memory of brilliance stolen by violence.